Jason Miller had always been the kind of person who cherished solitude. At 34, he had built a quiet, predictable life for himself, working the night shift as a security guard at a sleek downtown office tower in Chicago. He relished the stillness of the late hours. His apartment, a modest one-bedroom near the edge of the city, was a haven from the chaos of the outside world. No roommates, no social commitments, just a few late-night snacks, Netflix, and peace. The job wasn't glamorous, but it was simple. His responsibilities included patrolling the building's empty hallways, keeping an eye on the security cameras, and making sure no one tampered with the sensitive equipment. In a way, the job was perfect for someone like Jason, who didn't crave interaction with others. He found solace in the quiet hum of the building's air conditioning, the soft glow of the monitors, and the routine of his night. But there was one rule he lived by: never answer unknown numbers. It wasn't born from any traumatic experience. Jason just liked keeping things uncomplicated. With scam calls, telemarketers, and robocalls becoming more frequent, he figured that avoiding unknown numbers was simply the smart thing to do. There was no need to answer unless he recognized the caller. That way, he could maintain his quiet, predictable existence. His phone could buzz all it wanted, but unless it was a name he recognized, it went unanswered, and for the most part, it worked. That was until one night. It was just past midnight when Jason's phone rang, jolting him awake from his usual late-night haze. He was sitting in the security office, half watching a crime thriller on Netflix, when he saw the familiar, unknown number flashing across the screen. His first instinct was to ignore it. He reached for the phone to silence it, but before his fingers could press the button, the phone buzzed again, then a third time, and a fourth. His irritation grew. This was the second time in the past week that he had been bothered by repeated calls from unknown numbers. Probably some kid pulling a prank, he muttered to himself. But then again, there was something strange about this. He stared at the phone for a moment, the glow of the screen casting a pale light on his face. His thumb hovered over the decline button, but for some reason he hesitated. What if it was important? Jason wasn't one to get paranoid. It was just a phone call. But still, the thought gnawed at him. What if this was an emergency? He had heard stories of people calling for help in the middle of the night, only to have their calls ignored because no one would answer a number they didn't recognize. He shook his head, frustrated with himself for even considering it. Finally, his curiosity got the better of him. He tapped the green button. "Hello," Jason said, his voice thick with annoyance, expecting the typical telemarketer spiel. But instead of the usual cheerful voice of a salesperson, there was nothing. A thick, suffocating silence. "Hello," Jason repeated, a little louder this time. "Who is this?" For a moment, he wondered if the call had dropped or if it was some glitch in the system. But then, just as he was about to hang up, a voice came through, soft, rasping, almost muffled, as if it were coming from far away. "You answered. Now you're next." Jason froze. His heart skipped a beat, and his grip on the phone tightened. It felt like the air had shifted in the room, as if something unseen had just stepped into the space around him. The voice sounded far too real, too urgent, to be some kind of prank. "Who is this?" Jason demanded, his voice rising with a sudden edge of fear. The line went dead. Jason stared at the phone in his hand. The call had ended, but it didn't make sense. Who could? The words echoed in his mind, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The phone screen showed the call timer had ended, but his finger hesitated before hitting the end call button. Something was wrong. Something about the call didn't sit right with him. He pressed the button anyway, telling himself that it was just a prank, a fluke. But when he tried to turn the phone off, something strange happened. The screen flickered, and instead of shutting down, it came back on, and the call timer resumed. 8 seconds, 9 seconds, 10 seconds. Jason's stomach turned. He pressed the power button again, but the phone remained on. The timer continued ticking, even though the call had long ended. Confused and a little unnerved, he turned the phone off completely. The screen went black, but only for a moment. As soon as he powered it back on, the call timer had resumed. 17 seconds, 18 seconds. Jason's breath hitched. His mind raced. Could it be a malfunction? A glitch in the phone's software? But how could it continue to count even after he'd turned the phone off? There was only one explanation that made sense, though it was far too impossible to believe. His hands were shaking as he began tapping through his phone, closing apps, restarting the device. Nothing worked. The timer remained, counting down like a clock, ticking away the last moments of his life. He felt trapped. There was no escaping it. At first, he dismissed it. It's just a technical issue, he thought. Nothing more. But as the minutes dragged on, Jason could feel the unease growing inside him. Something about the voice, the message, the endless timer, it all felt too real. He had to stop it. Had to figure out what was going on. Had to make sure it wasn't really happening. And just as he was about to shut the phone down for good, the buzzing began again. Unknown number. This time, his heart skipped a beat, and he immediately declined the call. His finger hovered over the screen, his pulse racing. But then came another thought, one that crept into his mind like a whisper, just like the one on the phone. What if this was an emergency? What if someone needed help? He knew he couldn't ignore it. He had to answer. He had to. With trembling fingers, Jason swiped to answer. This time, there was no whisper, no voice, just silence. The next night, Jason returned to work, his mind still tangled in the events of the previous evening. He tried to shake off the unsettling feeling that had clung to him like a second skin, but the more he thought about it, the harder it became to ignore. It had only been a prank, right? Some elaborate hoax by a stranger with too much time on their hands. Maybe it was a glitch, an issue with his phone. Still, the voice, the words, "You answered, now you're next," kept echoing in his mind, becoming louder with every passing minute. But despite his efforts to put behind him, it was as if the instant refused to let him go. As Jason sat in the security office, the clock ticking toward midnight, his phone buzzed again. He stiffened, his heart skipping a beat as his eyes darted toward the screen. Unknown number. He froze. The air felt thick, like the world had paused in anticipation. His fingers trembled as he picked up the phone, but this time he didn't immediately answer. Instead, he let it ring, studying the screen with growing anxiety. His mind screamed at him to ignore it, to block the number and go on with his night. But the nagging feeling in his gut told him otherwise. What if it was important? A few seconds later, the ringing stopped. He exhaled, relieved, until he noticed a notification on his phone. Voicemail. A cold shiver ran down his spine. He hadn't answered the call. No one had spoken. So why would it be a voicemail? He hesitated for a moment, then swiped to listen. His stomach lurched. It was his own voice. "It's me. Don't answer. Don't answer anymore. It doesn't stop. It never stops." Jason's throat went dry. He could barely breathe. His heart pounded in his chest as he held the phone tightly, unwilling to let it drop. How was this possible? How could his own voice be on a recording when he hadn't even left a message? The room around him seemed to warp, the edges of the walls darkening as his mind raced. Was this some sort of sick joke? He quickly scanned security monitors in front of him, tried to shake off the fear that was tightening its grip. His hands were slick with sweat, and his head felt foggy, as though a heavy fog had descended upon him. The cameras showed an empty building. Until one caught his eye, the image was faint, but it was unmistakable. A shadow darted across the hallway on the 13th floor. He blinked, his stomach tightening with dread. The 13th floor had been closed off for years, ever since the fire had left it gutted and condemned. No one went up there, and the elevator had long since been shut off. Jason rubbed his eyes, convinced he was seeing things. The lights in the building flickered, casting erratic shadows across the darkened hallways. He turned his attention back to the monitor, but the shadow was gone. But it had been there. His phone buzzed again, and this time, it wasn't an unknown number. The caller ID showed blocked. He sighed, almost relieved. It was probably just a scam call, nothing more. But before he could decline it, the call ended. A voicemail notification appeared on his screen. Another voicemail. Jason's fingers twitched as he swiped to listen, his heart hammering in his chest. He didn't want to hear it, but he couldn't stop himself. His own voice once again. He's watching. He's here. He's on the 13th floor. Jason's blood ran cold. He shot up from the chair and dashed for the elevator. What was happening? Who was sending these messages? And what did it mean? His mind raced as he pressed the button to the 13th floor, each second feeling like an eternity. The elevator door slid open with a low hum, and Jason stepped inside. As the elevator ascended, the silence felt suffocating. The world outside seemed to fall away, and it was just him and the empty floors. He glanced at the emergency lights above him, dim, flickering. He reached for the 13th floor button, hesitated, and then pressed it. A sick feeling settled in his stomach. The elevator doors slid open with an eerie slowness. The hallway was dark, the floor covered in dust and debris. It looked abandoned. Jason stepped out cautiously, his footsteps muffled on the rotting carpet. The building seemed quieter here, as if the air itself was holding its breath. The walls were lined with water stains, the windows boarded up, and a strange sense of stillness pervaded the space. He was almost at the end of the hall when he saw it. A figure standing motionless in the shadows. It was a man, tall, thin, his back turned to Jason. The figure didn't move, didn't even acknowledge his presence. The hairs on Jason's neck stood on end, and his breath hitched. His first instinct was to run, but something anchored him to the spot, as if he were caught in some unseen force. He called out, "Hello?" The man didn't respond. Jason took a step forward, his heartbeat accelerating. The figure slowly turned to face him, its hollow eyes locking onto his with a vacant, lifeless stare. A cold shiver ran down Jason's spine as he stood frozen in place, unable to look away. It was only when the figure opened its mouth to speak that Jason realized. The man wasn't breathing, but the voice that came from the figure's lips wasn't dead. It was smooth, clear. "You should never have answered." Jason turned to run, but before he could move, the elevator doors slammed shut behind him. He was trapped, and the last thing he heard before the world went black was his own voice, whispering in the dark. Jason didn't know how long he had been unconscious. His head throbbed as he stirred, the air around him thick with an unnatural stillness. The last thing he remembered was a voice, the empty stare of the figure in the hallway, and then nothing, just blackness. When his eyes fluttered open, he was back in security office. The familiar glow of the CCTV monitors greeted him, but something was different. The lights were dimmer, the shadows in the room longer, more oppressive. His phone was on the desk, buzzing once again with an unknown number flashing on the screen. Jason recoiled, his heart racing as the memories of the last few minutes. The haunting figure, the voice, came flooding back. The image of the man in the 13th floor hallway lingered in his mind, as vivid as it had been when it happened. Was it real? Had it been a dream? He tried to shake off the uncertainty, but the weight of the experience felt like a cold hand pressing against his chest. He snatched up the phone, his fingers trembling as he answered the call. "Hello." Jason's voice was shaky but firm. There was no response at first, just static. His eyes flicked to the screen, watching the timer count up again, just like the first time. And then the whisper came through the line, low and hollow. "I told you, he's waiting." Jason's blood ran cold. It was the same voice, the voice that had warned him before, the voice of someone who was already too far gone. He quickly ended the call, but this time there was no relief. His heart pounded in his ears as the call kept ringing back, relentless. It was as if he couldn't escape it, couldn't shut it out. His phone vibrated violently, the screen flickering between black and white, displaying the same unknown number over and over. I didn't believe it. "I thought I could escape," Jason whispered to himself, repeating the words from the voicemail that had sounded just like him. "But it's real. It's real." He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being pulled deeper into something far darker than he had ever imagined. His eyes turned to the security monitors once more. The camera feed of the 13th floor flashed on the screen, displaying the empty hallway. Or so he thought. There, just at the corner of the frame, was something, a figure, hunched over, standing still in the shadows. The camera flickered, then cleared, revealing the same tall, thin figure that had haunted him before. Jason felt his stomach drop. He reached for the intercom system, speaking into the empty air. "Is anyone there? What do you want?" No response. Just that figure, staring at the camera. He swallowed, trying to steady his breathing. The sense of dread was overwhelming. He felt it pressing in from every side, wrapping itself around his chest and squeezing the air from his lungs. Every instinct screamed at him to leave the building, to run far, far away from this place, from whatever was happening. But his legs felt like lead. His body refused to move. The figure in the camera feed shifted. It didn't walk. It simply glided. Unnaturally fast, the movement jerky, like a puppet on invisible strings. It was as if the laws of time and space no longer applied to it. Jason's mind reeled. He didn't know what to think, what to do. Was this the same entity? Was it still Lucas Gray? He remembered the online threads he'd read, the rumors, the stories of people who had vanished after receiving the mysterious calls. Lucas Gray had died in a heart attack 3 years ago. At least, that was the official cause. But now, Jason wasn't so sure. The figure he was seeing, the voice that had spoken to him, the disturbing messages, it all pointed to something far darker. Jason checked the time. The minutes dragged on like hours, and still, the phone vibrated. Every few seconds, another call, another voicemail. But he couldn't bring himself to listen. He didn't want to hear it anymore. The words that echoed in his mind were enough. "You answered. Now you're next." The cameras flickered again, and for the briefest of moments, Jason saw something, a quick, erratic movement in the corner of the 13th floor hallway. The lights above the hallway flickered. A hiss of static came through the intercom. Then it went quiet. Too quiet. Jason stood up, compelled by something beyond his control. It wasn't just fear that drove him. It was a deep, gnawing curiosity, a need to understand, to uncover the truth. Was he truly being hunted by this entity, this man who had died years ago, or was it something else? He wasn't sure anymore. He left the security office and made his way to the elevator. Each step felt heavy, as if the floor itself were pulling him downward into the unknown. When the elevator doors opened to the 13th floor, the air seemed to thicken. The lights buzzed overhead, casting long, jagged shadows on the walls. The faint scent of mildew and burnt wood hung in the air, remnants of the fire that had ravaged the building all those years ago. Jason moved slowly down the hallway, every creak of his shoes echoing off the walls. He kept his eyes fixed on the far end of the hall, where the figure had appeared before. It wasn't there anymore, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching him. And then, there it was, at the end of the hallway, standing still and motionless. Jason's heart raced. He couldn't bring himself to speak, to call out. It was as if the words were stuck in his throat. Instead, he simply stood there, staring at the figure. It turned to face him. Its eyes were empty, hollow, as if there was nothing left behind them, just an abyss. And then it spoke. "You should have stayed away." Jason felt the words slice through him like a knife. His entire body trembled. He tried to back away, but his legs refused to move. Suddenly, the world seemed to shift. The walls seemed to close in. The ground beneath him felt unstable, as though it was crumbling away. "He's waiting for you," the voice whispered, echoing through his mind, even after the figure had disappeared into the shadows. Jason's phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. His finger hovered over the screen, but he didn't answer. He couldn't. "It's too late," the voice inside his head whispered. Jason's breath came in shallow gasps as he stumbled down the dark, abandoned hallway of the 13th floor. His mind raced, but the terror was too overwhelming for rational thought. Each step seemed to echo in the emptiness, each footfall reverberating like a countdown to something inevitable. His pulse thudded in his ears, drowning out all other sound. The air was colder here, much colder than the rest of the building. It was as though the temperature had dropped by degrees, as if the floor itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. He had thought he could outsmart whatever it was that was haunting him. He thought he could break the cycle, escape the calls, the figure, the whispers. But every corner he turned, every darkened room he stepped into, led him further into the heart of the nightmare. The lights above flickered again, casting long, jagged shadows that seemed to move with a mind of their own. Jason's throat tightened as he reached the end of the hallway. His mind told him to turn back, to leave, but his legs refused to obey. The door at the end of the hall was slightly ajar, and a pale light seeped from within. It was the only thing in the building that wasn't engulfed in darkness. The door creaked open as he pushed it, revealing a room bathed in a sickly, unnatural glow. Inside, the air was thick, heavy, laden with something Jason couldn't name. The walls were covered in strange symbols, scratched into the surface like they had been carved with a sharp object. The floor was stained with dark patches, but it wasn't the kind of stain one could simply wipe away. And there, standing at the center of the room, was the figure. Jason's heart froze in his chest as he recognized the pale face staring back at him. It was the same man who had appeared in the hallway, a gaunt, hollow-eyed figure that seemed almost lifeless, yet somehow still alive. His skin was deathly pale, stretched tight over the bones of his skull. The figure's mouth moved, but there was no sound at first. It was as though the air itself was muffling the voice. Jason felt the temperature drop another few degrees as he stepped forward, as if drawn into the room by an invisible force. "I told you," the figure spoke, its voice hoarse and ragged. "You shouldn't have answered." Jason's throat tightened. It was Lucas Gray, or at least, it looked like him. He had read about Lucas, the man who had died suddenly, the cause of death declared a heart attack. But now, standing in front of him, Lucas didn't look like the man from the news reports. This wasn't the man who had died. This was something else. Something that had been twisted by darkness. "What do you want?" Jason managed a rasp. His voice was barely a whisper, as if the room itself was stealing the sound from his mouth. The figure smiled, but it wasn't a smile of reassurance. It was a grin of cold satisfaction, one that spoke of things beyond Jason's comprehension. The darkness in its eyes deepened, swallowing the light around them. "What I want is for you to join me. Forever." Jason's chest tightened. His legs wobbled as the figure's words sank in, the weight of their meaning pressing down on him. He had always been alone in his apartment in his life, but now he felt more isolated than ever. The walls around him seemed to close in, and he was overwhelmed by the suffocating presence of the room. But even as he trembled in fear, something inside him snapped. A surge of panic, a desperate need to escape. The whispers, the voice, the figure, they had been chasing him, cornering him, pushing him further into this nightmare. And now it was clear there was no way out. The door slammed shut behind him with a deafening thud, as if locking him in place. Jason's heart pounded so loudly that it felt like it might burst out of his chest. He scrambled toward the door, but it wouldn't budge. The handle turned, but the door remained stuck, as if something or someone was holding it closed on the other side. "Let me out!" Jason screamed, his voice raw with desperation. But the figure remained motionless, watching him with cold eyes. "You answered," it said again, its voice now a low rasp. "Now you belong to him. To us." Jason's mind spun. He tried to think of an escape, of a way out. But it was too late. The phone, the call, the repeated messages. It had all been leading to this moment. The price had been paid. His curiosity, his decision to answer that first call, had sealed his fate. Suddenly, the phone in Jason's pocket buzzed. He fumbled for it, his hand shaking violently, and pulled it out. The screen displayed the same unknown number. The call was still coming through, relentless, like a countdown clock ticking toward his doom. A sick feeling gripped Jason's insides as he realized the truth. It wasn't just a figure. It wasn't just a room. The call was part of it. He had been marked, chosen by something far older, something far more malevolent than he could ever understand. And now it was too late to escape. He answered the phone without thinking, the action as automatic as breathing. His own voice greeted him from the other side of the line, distorted and hollow. "It's too late," it said. "You answered, and now you're next." Jason dropped the phone in shock, his eyes widening as the room around him began to warp and shift. The walls seemed to stretch, the floor buckling beneath his feet. He reached for the door again, but his body grew heavier, as though the weight of the world had settled on his shoulders. His vision blurred as he struggled to stay conscious. The figure stepped forward, and Jason tried to back away, but his legs failed him. The air was thick with the smell of rot, of decay, and the figure's presence pressed down on him like a physical force. As he fell to the floor, unable to move, the figure knelt beside him, its cold fingers brushing against his skin. "Welcome to the end," the figure whispered, and Jason's vision went dark.